Okay, let's unpack this. We are tackling a really big question today, one that you hear everywhere now, boardrooms, politics,
Yeah.
everywhere. How do you actually build something, a company, maybe a government, even just a strategy that's truly built to last? And we're not talking about just, a flash-in-the-pan success
Mm.
or one great quarter. We mean real, enduring, generational resilience.
That's right. True endurance, the kind that, like you said, survives tough times, shifts in culture, leadership changes. It demands a huge shift in how we even measure success.
Hmm.
And actually, our sources suggest that to really get a handle on success, you first have to understand what causes catastrophic failure. And they're often buried under layers of complexity, maybe a lack of transparency.
Right.
So yeah, real longevity means moving away from just chasing short-term gains for, a handful of people at the top.
Exactly. So our mission today is pretty ambitious, I'll admit. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources that seem, on the surface, quite different. We've got ancient Greek philosophy, military strategy, modern business thinking, even some Eastern spiritual texts. And the goal is to kind of distill from all of this the actual playbook, if you like, for leadership, longevity, and resilience. Yeah. We're really looking at what it takes for a leader or a system to become truly sustainable. And by that, we mean building value that serves everyone involved, the stakeholders, the future, not just the shareholders right now.
And what's really fascinating when you look across all these sources spanning thousands of years is this recurring tension. It's always this difference between success that's flashy but fragile versus vitality that's stable and lasts. And that lasting vitality, it nearly always seems rooted in, well, systemic accountability and making sure the benefits spread out, they go to the collective. Aristotle called it the common good. It can't just be for the people pulling the levers of power.
Okay, so if we're looking for fragility, where do we start? Maybe with Nassim Taleb. His idea of skin in the game seems fundamental here.
Absolutely fundamental. He argues quite forcefully that the biggest fragilizer, the thing that practically guarantees instability down the road, is when people making big decisions don't have any personal downside risk. No skin in the game.
And this creates a really dangerous asymmetry, doesn't it?
A terrible asymmetry. Understanding how this works is key. It lets some people or some groups become what Taleb calls anti-fragile. Now, that's not just being tough or resilient. Anti-fragile means they actually benefit from chaos, from volatility, from mistakes.
How did that work? How do they benefit?
Well, they manage to push all the downside, all the risks, all the potential losses onto other people. Think taxpayers, junior employees, maybe even future generations who aren't even around to object.
And because everything's so complex now, so interconnected, these risks are easy to hide, right?
Very easy, especially with people who have a lot of influence but are totally disconnected from the real-world consequences of their advice or their decisions.
Taleb has a name for them, doesn't he? The inverse hero.
That's the one. A traditional hero, they take personal risks for the good of the group, the inverse hero. They profit from systems where they get the upside from risk while making absolutely sure they're protected from any downside. He specifically calls out certain types, some bureaucrats, bankers, academics, and interestingly, what he calls the IAND.
The IAND, what's that stand for?
International Association of Name Droppers.
Ah, okay. So who are these people in practice?
Think high-level policy advisors, maybe big-name consultants, celebrity economists, the kind of people who help shape the rules, and then they often profit handsomely, big speaking fees, consulting gigs, regardless of whether the policies they pushed actually crash and burn.
Right, so they're basically gaming the system.
Precisely. And the mechanism of fragility is right there. When things go right, they collect huge bonuses, prestige, awards. But when things inevitably go wrong, the financial system melts down, the big policy initiative fails spectacularly. What happens to them? They keep their jobs, maybe move sideways into another lucrative position. And who pays for the cleanup? It's the average person, the taxpayer, the employees lower down, who had zero say in the decision that caused the mess. That complete separation between making a decision and facing its consequences, that's the engine driving unsustainability.
That idea of power without consequence, arbitrary power, it's not exactly new, is it? If we zoom out to political philosophy, there's this classic debate about the sovereign leader.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the huge difference between someone like Hobbes and then John Locke. Hobbes, writing Leviathan after the English Civil War, he takes this very hard absolutist stance. He basically says the sovereign leader makes no actual agreement, no covenant with the people, so they can't break an agreement that never existed. Once people hand over power to the sovereign, that's it. They're bound. Trying to revolt is pointless because agreements are just words and breath, Hobbes says, unless there's a public sword to enforce them. For Hobbes, power has to be absolute to stop society collapsing back into chaos, the state of nature.
So the Hobbesian CEO would be that ultimate top-down command and control type, unaccountable, operating above the rules everyone else followed.
Pretty much. But then you get John Locke, who's really the champion of limited government, and he just completely rejects that model.
Oh, so.
Locke insists that political power, to be legitimate, must be governed by laws that are declared and known, laws everyone understands. The crucial thing for Locke is legitimacy. When a leader starts acting based on their own private will, sudden whims, off-the-cuff orders, secret decrees, instead of following the publicly known law,
They degrade themselves.
instantly, they stop being the legitimate representative of the people or the system.
But hang on, what about crisis situations? Don't you sometimes need a strong leader to just take charge, make a quick call outside the usual rules? How does Locke account for that kind of agile leadership?
That's a really important point. Locke isn't arguing against decisive action. He's arguing against arbitrary action. Action has to be guided by some known principle or process, even in a crisis. It can't just be the leader's personal desire taking over. When that happens, when their internal whim replaces the external declared law, Locke's conclusion is pretty stark. He says they become but a single private person without power and without will that has no right to obedience. Their authority just evaporates.
Wow. So that's the core weakness right there, legitimacy. Sustainability isn't just about the balance sheet. It's about whether the leader's power is seen as ethically and legally sound. When the boss starts acting like a king, making up rules as they go along, the whole system loses trust, loses stability. That disconnect, that's fragile.
And we see this play out in the corporate world, too, with some really painful examples. Cases where leaders failed to build something truly lasting because their personal will trumped the health of the system. Think about Lee Iacocca at Chrysler. Remember him?
Oh yeah, the big turnaround guy in the 80s. Saved the company, brought in the minivan.
Exactly. Brilliant in many ways, secured that government loan, launched hit products. But the sources point out that even after the turnaround, he really struggled to let go of the, quote, perks of executive kingship.
Right, I remember hearing stories. He saw the company almost as his personal property, didn't he?
Very much so. He kept delaying his retirement. People joked that Iacocca stood for, "I am chairman of Chrysler Corporation always." But more seriously, even after he finally retired, he was demanding things like private jets, massive stock options, and then, incredibly, he even launched a hostile takeover bid against Chrysler, working with Krikorian, against the company he supposedly saved.
Wow, that's something.
The real problem, the flaw, was that intense focus on his gain, his personal glory. He saved Chrysler, yes, but only temporarily. He didn't build the systems the culture needed for enduring greatness. The whole thing was still centered on him, his perks, his kingship, which meant the underlying weaknesses were still there. And eventually, Chrysler became unstable again, leading to that, well, often difficult merger with Daimler-Benz. The success wasn't sustained because it was tied to the person, not embedded in the system.
That desire for unlimited perks, it sounds exactly like something Ralph Waldo Emerson warned about centuries ago, his essay, The Law of Compensation. It suggests this isn't just a corporate issue, it's like a law of nature.
Emerson's idea is fascinating. He talks about this universal dualism like, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, but applied more broadly. Every excess creates a defect somewhere else. Nature, he says, just hates monopolies and exceptions. It's always striving for balance.
Always trying to level things out.
Yeah. And he has this one passage that sounds like it could have been written about Wall Street yesterday. He writes, "If the gatherer gathers too much, nature takes out of the man what she puts into his chest, swells the estate, but kills the owner."
Chilly.
It's a philosophical way of saying that any system designed for extreme concentrated excess, whether it's too much power in one person's hands or too much profit hoarded in one place, is inherently unstable. It's setting itself up for a fall because it violates that natural tendency towards balance.
So if your leadership style or your whole system relies on constantly concentrating resources or power, it's basically got planned obsolescence built right in.
Exactly. It's fundamentally unsustainable.
Okay, so if that's fragility, unaccountable power, imbalance, excess, what does the blueprint for endurance look like? Let's go back to the ancients again. Aristotle. He thought a lot about what makes a political system, a constitution, actually last versus just, existing for a while.
Aristotle offers this really fundamental insight, and it connects directly to modern ideas like stakeholder value, or ESG, actually. He drew a clear line between what rulers think makes their system strong maybe ideological purity, or sticking rigidly to tradition and the qualities that actually allow it to survive over the long haul.
And what are those qualities? What makes it last?
The constitutions that endure, Aristotle found, are the ones that become more moderate over time, more inclusive, and crucially aimed more at the common benefit rather than just lining the pockets of the rulers. It's less about how perfectly your oligarchy fits the textbook definition, and more about how many people actually feel like they have a stake in keeping the system going.
So even if you have, say, an oligarchy ruled by the wealthy, they still have to run it in a way.
Right. They might distribute offices based on wealth, sure. But Aristotle says the kind of justice that will actually allow that oligarchy to survive needs to be carefully designed. It needs to ensure that the multitude of those who want the Constitution is stronger than the multitude of those who do not. Basically, you need more people benefiting, or at least not actively harmed, than people who want to tear it down.
That feels like the absolute core of structural sustainability.
Yeah.
The people in charge have to deliberately curb their own instincts to grab everything, otherwise the whole system becomes unstable because too many people are left out.
It's like an ancient blueprint for ESG principles. If your system only benefits a tiny group in the short term, it's structurally fragile. It won't last. And this need for built-in moderation, for checks on concentrated power, leads us straight to the thinking of the American founders. You see it all through the Federalist Papers. They spent a lot of time studying the republics that had lasted places like Sparta, Rome, Carthage. And what did they notice? They all had institutions designed to balance stability with liberty. Often a senate or some kind of second chamber doing exactly what Aristotle described, checking the impulses of a single ruling group.
Yeah, the founders were almost paranoid about power becoming too concentrated. They saw a huge danger if you put the whole legislative trust in the hands of one body of men. Even if that body was elected, they knew that representatives could still betray the people's interests or get swept up by factionalism.
So the solution wasn't just a strong leader or just a democratic assembly. It was forcing them to work together. The mandated agreement, the concurrence of separate different bodies, those checks and balances, that built-in structural tension. That's the bedrock of resilience. Yes, it slows things down sometimes, it prevents rash decisions, but it also stops one narrow interest group from hijacking the whole system for its own benefit.
You know, there's a really interesting parallel here in military strategy, isn't there? With Clausewitz, his famous line about war being the continuation of policy.
Right, war is merely the continuation of politic policy by other means. It's quoted all the time, but the depth of it is often missed. If you think about politic in our context, it means the state's ultimate goals, the mission, the higher purpose. Or for a company, it's the long-term strategic vision tied to its core values. What Clausewitz is warning the generals is your actions on the ground, the means, the battles you fight, maybe the quarterly targets you hit, they must constantly be guided by and checked against that ultimate political purpose.
The big danger is when the means become the end in themselves, like an army just focused on killing the enemy or taking ground without asking why. How does this serve the larger goal? They could win every single battle.
And still lose the war. Exactly. And you see the corporate version all the time. Leaders laser focused on maximizing this quarter's profit no matter the cost. They take on huge debt, they squeeze suppliers until the chain breaks, they burn out their best people. They're winning the immediate financial skirmish, but they're completely undermining the long-term health of the entire system. Why? Because they've lost sight of the politic, the why. The truly sustainable leader never lets the tactical win obscure the strategic purpose. The means must always serve the end. So, okay, having the right structure, these checks and balances, that's crucial. But it's not enough on its own, is it? You also need a culture inside that structure, one that's robust, adaptive, built on trust.
If the architecture provides the stability, the culture needs to provide the resilience, especially when things get chaotic.
Right. And if you want to learn about operating effectively in a total chaos, who better than, say, the U.S. Navy SEALs? Looking at materials about how they operate, particularly in complex environments like Iraq, you see this absolute necessity of breaking down old barriers, dismantling secrecy between units, overcoming inter-service rivalries. Why? To create radical transparency. Everyone needs to understand the big picture, the shared goal, and exactly where they fit within that complex system.
And that transparency, that shared understanding is what enables what they call decentralized command. Right.
Precisely. The battlefield, say in Armadi, was just too complex, too fast-moving for decisions to always go up and down a rigid chain of command. So leadership realized they had to push decision-making authority further down. They had to train, groom, and then fundamentally trust subordinate leaders, platoon commanders, senior NCOs, to make critical split-second decisions on the ground, often with incomplete information.
But that kind of empowerment, that level of trust, it only works if two conditions are met, doesn't it?
Yeah.
One, everyone needs crystal clarity on the overall mission, the shared context, that's the transparency part. And two, the people making those decentralized decisions have to be rigorously prepared and trusted to act in line with that higher purpose. You can't just delegate without preparation and trust.
Absolutely. You can't have a sustainable, resilient organization if all the critical knowledge and all the decision-making power gets stuck in a bottleneck at the very top. It just doesn't work in a complex world.
And this idea of clarity and trust, it's not just for the military, is it? It seems vital in creative fields, too. Like, look at Pixar. Their brain trust model is legendary.
Probably the most successful creative feedback and accountability structure ever devised. And the key ingredient, candor. Absolute, unvarnished honesty, deliberately elevated above hierarchy.
And they famously protected that candor by, well, by keeping Steve Jobs out of the room, right?
Exactly. And it wasn't meant as a personal insult to Jobs. It was a structural safeguard. It physically removed the ultimate power figure from that crucial, vulnerable feedback loop. It ensured that people felt safe enough to speak the hard truth.
Because the goal wasn't to please the boss.
No. The goal of that intense, sometimes difficult debate isn't about individuals winning arguments or pushing their own agenda. The source material is clear. The brain trust argues to excavate the truth. There's a fantastic story about this during the making of WALL-E.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that.
So during a brain trust review for WALL-E, Brad Bird, who was actually directing Ratatouille at the time, another Pixar film, he really challenged the film's ending. The original ending apparently just had the robot EV restoring WALL-E's memory after he gets damaged. A technical fix, basically. But Bird argued forcefully that it wasn't emotionally satisfying. He said the audience needed more. They needed to see Evie make a sacrifice. She needed to prioritize saving WALL-E over fulfilling her own programmed directive.
Wow, that's a fundamental shift in the character's motivation and the story's meaning.
Huge shift. It changes the ending from just fixing a machine to essentially an act of love, a spiritual choice. Now, suggesting that kind of massive change late in production, that takes incredible candor. It risks offending the director, derailing the schedule. But because Pixar had built this space where that kind of brutal honesty was not just allowed but expected, they could have that debate. And they ultimately arrived at that much more powerful ending. They found a shared truth they wouldn't have reached otherwise.
That level of dialogue, especially when the stakes are so high, requires real skill, though. It's easy for things to go off the rails.
It does. And the book Crucial Conversations really digs into this. When emotions are high, opinions differ, the stakes are significant. The absolute key is creating conditions where people feel safe enough to be both honest and respectful. You have to maintain psychological safety while still putting the real issues on the table, building that shared pool of meaning, as they call it.
And part of getting to that shared meaning is making sure you're tackling the right problem, not just the first one that comes up.
Yes, this is critical, especially in coaching or leadership development. People often jump to solve the most obvious, surface-level issue. They don't dig deep enough to find the real underlying challenge.
So how do you stop that premature rush to a solution?
There's a powerful tool mentioned called the focus question. It sounds incredibly simple, but it's profound. What's the real challenge here for you?
For you, why is that part so important?
Because it makes it personal.
Yeah.
It pins the issue directly to the individual you're talking to. So if someone comes to you and says, ugh, this whole process is broken, that's vague, it's external. But if you ask, okay, I hear that, what's the real challenge here for you? It forces them to think differently. They have to consider, what part of this is my responsibility? What do I need to figure out? What skill do I need to develop? What risk do I need to take? It keeps the focus on actionable personal growth or identifying the specific system failure point rather than just letting off steam.
That commitment to finding the real truth, it must mean being willing to embrace mistakes.
Yay.
Seeing failure not as something to be avoided at all costs, but as well as data.
Absolutely. The sustainable, resilient organization understands that trial and error isn't a waste of time. It's essential. Experiments are, by their nature, fact-finding missions. Any outcome, even one that feels like a failure, is actually a good outcome if it provides new information, if it helps you learn and adjust course.
And this is where sustainable organizations really part ways with fragile ones, isn't it? The attitude towards planning.
Oh, massively. Fragile systems often encourage overplanning, pouring immense energy into trying to predict and control everything, hoping to eliminate risk entirely. But what happens? They just take much longer to find out they were wrong. And when failure inevitably happens anyway, because you can't predict everything, they're completely crushed by it. They resist learning from it.
And often all that careful planning just leads to cautious, unoriginal work, right? Because the focus was on minimizing downside, not maximizing potential upside.
Exactly. Derivative, safe bets. So the key for a leader wanting sustainability is to make it genuinely safe to make mistakes and, crucially, to talk about them. The sources talk about liberator leaders, people who create this environment of learning. And a great example given is Bob Lutz, the car executive with that long career at GM, Ford, Chrysler.
Lutz. Yeah, he had a reputation for being pretty candid.
He was apparently shameless in speaking about his own mistakes. He didn't try to hide them or spin them. Instead, he brought this real intellectual curiosity for why things didn't work out. He didn't just tolerate failure, he analyzed it publicly. By being open about his own errors, even major product flops, he modeled that vulnerability. He made it okay for his teams to take the necessary risks, the calculated chances that ultimately lead to breakthroughs and innovation.
That culture of candor, learning from mistakes.
Yeah.
Feels like it must tie into motivation too, why people choose to stick around.
Deeply tied. Which brings us to maybe the final piece of this cultural puzzle for resilience, prioritizing purpose over paycheck.
The idea that money isn't the only thing, or even the main thing, that keeps people committed long term.
Right. Assuming you're meeting basic needs, paying people fairly, that's table stakes. What really makes people stay, what makes them truly engaged, is believing in the purpose of the organization, feeling like their work actually matters, that they can make a difference. This loops right back to Aristotle's common benefit idea. The system has to offer something more than just profit for the owners.
There's a really stark example of this in the sources, comparing two big tobacco companies back when they were under siege. Philip Morris versus R.J. Reynolds.
It's a powerful contrast, and it links purpose directly to outcomes. The gist is that Philip Morris executives, for better or worse, seem to have this deep, almost passionate identification with the tobacco business itself. They saw themselves as defenders of a certain lifestyle, the rugged individualist, the Marlboro man.
So their commitment went beyond just the financial results.
It seemed to. They stuck with the core business, innovated within it, fought regulations fiercely, arguably because they had bought into this identity. Now contrast that with R.J. Reynolds. The sources suggest their executives increasingly saw tobacco simply as a cash cow, a way to make money. They didn't have that same deep-seated belief in the product or its identity, so what did they do? They started diversifying aggressively, chasing growth in unrelated industries, seemingly losing passion for anything except the financial deal itself. And that ultimately led them down the path of a massive leveraged buyout, prioritizing short-term financial engineering over the long-term existence of the core business.
Wow. So the lack of a strong shared purpose beyond just making money made one company ultimately more fragile, more susceptible to financial maneuvering that didn't sustain the original enterprise.
Exactly. It shows that truly sustainable performance means evaluating people not just on hitting specific quarterly targets or getting bonuses, but on their alignment with the company's values and the culture they help maintain. When your people genuinely believe in the why, they'll work to build something that lasts, even when facing enormous external challenges.
So, okay, let's try and pull these threads together. What does this all really mean? We've journeyed through accountability, political philosophy, corporate history, military strategy, creative processes. It feels like the playbook for building something truly enduring, truly sustainable is maybe less about fine-tuning the profit machine for the next quarter.
And much more about optimizing, well, human nature itself. Understanding purpose, fostering accountability, building trust, ensuring fairness, all within a structure that has built-in checks against excess and imbalance.
It's about the system's resilience, grounded in human values.
And if we take that one step further, connect it to the biggest possible picture, we get to what might be the ultimate realization for a sustainable leader. Recognizing that true value isn't just about material things, it's more than matter. Our final source, from Eastern philosophy, offers this really profound perspective on why a purely material focus is inherently limited, inherently unsustainable.
This is from the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes. It suggests that true intelligence, true knowledge, isn't just about understanding the physical world, the material elements, the needs of the body. That kind of academic or purely empirical knowledge is incomplete. Real knowledge involves understanding the fundamental difference between spirit and matter, the enduring and the temporary.
So if a leader's focus is only on the material this quarter's profit, the physical assets on the books, the immediate stock price, they're missing something crucial.
They're missing the deeper, more enduring reality, the culture, the purpose, the collective spirit and trust. These things are far more resilient ultimately than any balance sheet number. Leaders who can't see beyond the material, who are solely focused on the immediate tangible world. Well, in this philosophical view, they might be considered less truly intelligent because they can't perceive what actually creates genuine, lasting stability.
There's another concept from that tradition mentioned, the kapayas, the miserly person. How does that fit in here? It sounds relevant to unsustainable behavior.
It's highly relevant. The kapanas aren't just misers in the sense of hoarding money. They are those who waste their human potential through excessive attachment to temporary material things. This could be excessive attachment to their immediate family, their social group, their nation, based purely on what the text calls the material conception of life. It's sometimes described metaphorically as a skin disease, an attachment only to the outer physical form, the immediate.
Okay, so translating that to leadership. This isn't just about being greedy for money. It's the leader who optimizes only for the very near term, treating their people, their resources, even their company's reputation, purely as assets for short-term gain, blind to the longer-term ethical or spiritual consequences.
Exactly. The miserly person desperately tries to protect their immediate world, their family's comfort now, their profits this quarter from the inevitable changes and challenges of life. They try to hoard, to control the material shell, because they don't grasp the deeper, more stable principles.
So real endurance, real sustainability from this perspective actually requires a degree of detachment from the immediate material outcome.
A kind of detachment, yes. Trusting that if the underlying structure is sound, like Aristotle advised, and the culture is healthy, like Pixar demonstrates, then the positive enduring results will naturally follow, even if there are short-term fluctuations. It's about focusing on the process and the principles, not just the immediate payoff.
We've covered a lot: the structure, the culture, the ethics needed for a system to endure. Let's wrap up, as we usually do, with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Something to connect these ideas in perhaps a challenging way.
Yeah, let's leave you with this. We draw this final point from the life of Frederick Douglass, the escaped slave who became a powerful abolitionist writer and orator. In his narrative, Douglass recounts how his enslaver, a Mr. Auld, reacted furiously when he found out Douglass was being taught to read. Auld declared that learning would make a slave unmanageable and of no value to his master. Think about that. Auld understood perfectly that knowledge, literacy, conscience, these are the ingredients that make someone unmanageable, meaning free, ethical, unwilling to blindly obey unjust power.
So here's the question for you. If the goal of the sustainable leader, as we've discussed, is to foster things like candor, intellectual curiosity, decentralized decision-making, all hallmarks of an independent, unmanageable thinker, how does an organization truly achieve sustainability? How does it cultivate that very freedom of thought, that unmanageability in its people? Knowing all the while that the moral courage to question authority and speak truth, while being the organization's greatest long-term asset for adaptation and ethical behavior, is also potentially its biggest short-term risk to comfortable control and predictability.
The tension between fostering genuine intellectual freedom and maintaining immediate operational control, that's perhaps the ultimate tightrope walk for sustainable leadership. How an organization navigates that tension might just determine whether it truly endures, or whether, like the Kapans, it clings too tightly to fragile immediate power and ultimately fades away.